Tommy gives me a hard time every time I do. So we might have more joining us, and I hope we do. But today I wanted to, in this employers group, really talk about engagement and have a discussion around how do we engage people in the benefits that we offer. And I've got some thoughts because this whole aspirational movement is about learning from the best healthcare system in the world, the NUCA system of care, and how they've accomplished things. And so I wanted to share some thoughts around how they have leveraged relationship for engagement. But before I do, I'd love to see if any of those on the call, Kevin, Austin, and you may not be able to chat, Austin, but any initial thoughts, or Corb, any initial thoughts about whether engagement has been a challenge? I would say that's probably one of the most common things I hear is engagement's one of the hardest things to do in benefits, but just share any thoughts or ideas around that area. Kevin, any thoughts?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, we had a lot of engagement as we went through the process of designing it. We interacted a ton with everybody as we figured out what we were going to offer. We had a lot of discussion as we went through the process of getting everybody signed up and picking what was right. We're now looking at the reality that you can't stop there. Like that was like the start of the race. And we're literally going to have to sit down with everybody to make sure they're like, did you get the app on your phone? Have you reached out to call the Blomquist Health counselor to just see what it's like? Like, have you, and I feel like we're going to be doing that now for like the next 30, 60 days of helping everybody know that you've got all these benefits and you know how to access them so that they actually get used and they have the benefit coming in their lives, as opposed to it's just this thing that's out there that I don't know what to do with. And so I couldn't tell you how to do that well. I can tell you we're going to start figuring it out, and I hope it's not as painful as one-on-ones with everybody, but we're thinking about how do we showcase and talk about these benefits on a regular basis and keep bringing them up, or sharing success stories, or hey, so-and-so was able to use this, it was really helpful, or whatever, just so that we're
top of mind.
Those are the things that we're thinking about, but so I'd love to hear best practices of what other people are doing. So
Corb, any thoughts about engagement from your past experience?
Engagement is undoubtedly an issue. I think anybody that says it isn't is lying. So to kind of, I think, build on what you said about NUCA, I actually think relationships are the best way to engage, but they take time to build. So you can't just say, well, I want to engage my folks with relationships and it immediately happens. What we've seen across a broad range of partners, which are for us principally self-insured employers, is that some self-insured employers do a wonderful job of building kind of concern about how they manage their health plan, how they think about healthcare into their company culture. And so those relationships are much more solid, and those individuals are much more likely to engage because they talk. I mean, it's part of their leadership team meetings. Like they talk about how are we doing on healthcare costs, and are people aware of our initiatives? And I mean, because it's one of their biggest costs, right? So they're actively trying to manage it, and then that's trickling down through the organization, and that can be incredibly powerful. But the problem is you can't do that overnight. That takes time. So what are some things you can do overnight? Economic incentives can be powerful ways to drive engagement, and typically that should, at least in my opinion, that should be on the table, because the average employer is dramatically overpaying for healthcare because people are not engaged in effective strategies for controlling cost. And so you want to put in place economic incentives that drive the desired behavior. Here's another just quick comment on that. They've got to be meaningful. And by the way, meaningful, for just about everybody means the economic incentive needs to be north of $1,000 for any major service, or you can forget about anybody paying attention to it. And sometimes it should be considerably more than that. I mean, There are services where employers stand to save tens of thousands of dollars, and why you wouldn't then share, up to an individual's out-of-pocket maximum or even beyond. So thousands of dollars with a member. I don't know why you wouldn't do that. The other thing that we've learned, and then I'll shut up and let other people talk, is that it is, you can have incentives that are designed that are theoretically economically equivalent, meaning I have an opportunity to gain $5,000, or I have an opportunity to avoid losing $5,000. And an economist would say, well, those are economically equivalent. There's no difference. There is a huge difference. When people stand to lose $5,000 and they see, I'm going to lose this, and they can avoid that, that is incredibly powerful.
Yeah.
When they stand to gain 5,000 that they weren't otherwise going to get, not nearly as powerful, not even close.
Yeah, I would agree with you. That's been my experience as well. So let me share from my understanding what the NUCA system of care did back 20 years ago. And some of you have heard this story, but as you may recall, when they started the entire system, they went and asked their customers what they wanted. And the clarion call from the customers was that they wanted a healthcare system that partnered with them on their journey of life to help them live life to its fullest. And as you may have heard me say, they went to the doctors and said, hey, this is what we're going to do, is build this system. Most of the doctors said, we don't know how to do that. We were trained to diagnose and treat problems. We were not trained to proactively build relationships. And so they let them go. And they started from scratch in many ways to just build a healthcare system where the greatest resources were placed on a massively powerful primary care system. I love the analogy that Dr. Eby uses over and over and over. He talks about, if you've got a target and you're throwing a rock at that target, you can get pretty good at always hitting the target. In fact, if you practice enough, you can hit the target every time. But if what you have in your hand is not a rock and it's a live bird, and you want that bird to hit that target, you can, urge that bird to go to that target all day long, and that bird is rarely going to ever go to that target. And then he talks about the fact that that's what we're doing with people. People are, they're like a bird. You can't just throw them at a target. You have to put the nest at the target so that the person wants to go to the target, or the bird wants to go to the target. And he uses that analogy to describe how we're not trying to influence comatose people in an emergency room. Yeah, there are times when we do things to people and we have no choice. But the majority of healthcare is about urging and influencing people in proper ways. And the best way to do that is through relationships. So in their massively powerful primary care system, NUCA made it a priority, after assigning each team of primary care providers. So they would make a team up of 4 providers, and they would assign them about 1,000 members. And their job was to proactively go out and build relationships with those people. And they certainly leveraged family relationships and tribal relationships so that they weren't just out there one-on-one. And obviously, as they would connect with one family member, they would leverage that relationship to build relationships with the other family members. Same thing with the tribes. But I love the storytelling that the people up in Alaska have perfected so well. It's not just about calling and talking to them, going out to their home and visiting them. It's about perfecting the ability to get the person to tell their story. And not only to tell their story, but to effectively learn how to respond to that story. And I'll share with you perhaps one of the most aha experiences I've had in learning about the NUCA model. And that was when I went out there this last summer and went to their 5-day conference, which they put on for countries across the world. And I was in a room with 200 to 250 other people from all over the world, many from the Polynesian Islands. There were some from some of the other tribes across America. There were people from Canada. There was one group from America that wasn't a tribal group. And again, European countries from all over the world, people were there. And imagine spending 5 days as the best healthcare system and wanting to share with people from all over the world what you've accomplished and how you've done it. And imagine what that conference might be like and what you would do in that conference. What blew me away was the first 3 full days. They literally took over a half of the entire conference time to take every person that had come to that conference to learn about the best healthcare system in the world, to take them through the very same core concepts training that they take every employee, whether they're a doctor or a housekeeper. Everybody in the NUCA system goes through a 3-day training, teaching them. In essence, it's a class, it's a master class in coaching, but you're teaching people how to use storytelling to build relationships. So not only are you just setting up the communication to get someone to tell their story, because behind every eyes is a story. And the more you can get that person to tell their story, the more you build a trusting relationship. And what really surprised me was it wasn't just about getting the person to tell their story. It was also teaching their employees how to respond to that story. And if you want to learn more about this amazing storytelling relationship building process, I would encourage you to watch the video we did this last summer in September as part of the Conference 2, 2022 conference, where 2 of the key players up at the NUCA system did a session with me, and we talked about the importance of building this relationship and the importance of storytelling and how to set that up. And then they told their story. And I must say, I was rather embarrassed that when they completed each of them telling their story, I completely forgot all of the training that I was given 3 months prior to that on how to respond to story. And I did not respond appropriately to story. I just kind of talked about it from a more factual standpoint. And each of them jumped in and said, Daryl, I just have to jump in. And or when given the chance to talk, they said, before I say anything, because it's so ingrained in me, I have to respond to the other person's story, because that's what we do. And I watched them respond to each other's stories, again, as they've learned how to do over 20 years in such a remarkable way. And I sat there just dumbfounded going, yeah, you're right. You taught me that, and I didn't even do it. But this process of storytelling and how to respond to a person's story is an extremely powerful way to build relationship. And of course, what they've learned over these years is the way they engage their people into all the wonderful benefits that they offer through their health system is they proactively reach out to people, they build trust and relationships through the storytelling process, and then they leverage those relationships to connect with others. I'm a firm believer, as you said, Corb, that economic incentives are very powerful in getting people to engage. They've figured out how to do it without any incentives. And it's largely because it is a relationship group. It's 65,000 people that are all somewhat connected through their various tribes or within their tribes through their various family relationships. So they leverage those incredibly well. But they've learned how to not just wait till something happens. Now, if they've not had a chance to build that relationship and something does happen and a patient comes in, then they obviously use those skills to build that relationship at the time of that event. But as I think about, okay, how do we take what we can learn from them and apply it to businesses across the country? Corb, I'm with you. I think incentives play a very important role, especially if you're talking about a lot of people. If it's a small company, you can build a lot of relationships with culture, but I like to apply basic principles of behavioral change or behavior. The science of behavior has learned that people will do simple tasks for rewards. And like you said, Corb, sometimes it's a penalty that'll get someone to do a simple task. However, so that simple task may be simply to come to a relationship, but rewards seldom, if ever, build relationships. They're very ineffective at actually building the relationship. They're good at getting someone to do a simple task, and just coming to a relationship can be a simple task, but they're terrible at actually building the relationship. So the best strategies that I've discovered or have learned from the NUCA is you use incentives to engage people in a task. And you can get a lot of people to do tasks, especially like you said, Corb, when it's a lot of money, people will do a simple task for money. But then you use the fact that they've come to that. And in the aspirational model, we try to set up with every single person through the initial enrollment process, a relationship with a concierge navigator, someone who's going to actually help them navigate the system, a primary care provider, so they have someone that they know and can trust that's going to be taking care of their primary care and coordinating their care beyond that, and an influencer. NUCA combined the doctor and the influencer and trained their doctors how to be coaches, but that's a difficult thing when you can't really have a training process for everyone that's going to be involved in a direct primary care environment. So we bring in the coaches that are also important. And so effective initial engagement comes by using incentives to get people to connect with those three, and then helping those three build those relationships through those strategies. And sometimes it's just a matter of getting them involved in one, and then leveraging the one, let's say it's a coach, or let's say it's a navigator, to then, with that relationship, engage the person in contacting the other two. I've gone on and rambled long enough. I'm going to stop now and just get your response and reaction to some of those concepts and principles. Anybody have any thoughts? Tommy, Clegg, Austin, Corb, anybody on the call?
I think it's kind of, it's definitely about engaging in behavior, because once the behavior is engaged and it's part of your culture, I think I think it's a two-prong. I definitely think it's engaging in giving them incentives to engage in behavior, but then that behavior has to be beneficial to where then it just starts a snowball effect from there. Because, and I think that's what I've seen in your team, Daryl, is that you got them to respond in the behavior, but then the behavior was so rewarding that now people brag about it to the new team members that are coming on board. And so I think that's important too, is, and I know that's one thing that you definitely preach, is measurable items to make sure that not only are they doing the behavior for the incentive, but that behavior is creating a positive reaction so that it just snowballs into its own culture that becomes part of your company.
Right. Thanks, Tommy. Kevin.
I think it's hard to get all the different parties communicating with each other, and that to like the idea that it starts with trying to facilitate a direct primary care physician and an employee in a conversation, and then connecting all the other things that are going on to where there's some holistic view would be ideal, but it feels like it's still probably challenging. Like, I'm not sure what helps facilitate making that happen in a meaningful way between all the different parties that might be interacting with an employee in their life. And I'm wondering out loud at how is that possible? What does that look like? And hoping that somehow there's systems and tools that make that easier. I don't know. That was my thoughts.
Okay. Anybody else? Tommy just brought up the whole idea of CQI. That's another important element here, is you never launch something perfect off the bat. The reason NUCA has won the President's Malcolm Baldrige Award for Quality twice is because from the very get-go, they recognize that you're not going to create a perfect system out the gate. The whole idea of you're never going to have a perfect system, but the idea of constantly surveying, measuring, and monitoring whether you're reaching the goals you've set out to reach, and then constantly improving the process to better meet those goals, is how the NUCA system has created what they've done. And the last 2 days, when you go to their conference, is you learn all about this amazing CQI process that they put in place to do this. And so, like you said, Tommy, I think it is important that you don't get discouraged if things don't go quite like you want it, but you do need a process in place where you're actually measuring. And sometimes that's surveys of your employees. And of course, you can't overburden your employees with too many surveys, but the idea of implementing something and then finding ways to gather feedback, whether it's through the partners you've partnered with, or whether it's through technology where people can give a feedback through a feedback loop, or whether it's through surveys that people can respond. But the whole aspirational model is really built on what Nuka built their program on, which is continuous quality improvement, which is how are you going to identify the customer? What does the customer want and what's going to delight the customer? How are you going to then measure the processes that most affect that delight on the part of the customer? And then when you find variance in those measurements and monitors, you get those people closest to the process to improve them. And sometimes it's actually getting some of the team members to be involved in how to make that process better. Does that make sense? Any thoughts about that? Corb, have you seen that in your company as you've created over the last number of years, your service, the whole CQI process and that constant improvement?
Yes, and I've seen it in my clients' experience as well. I mean, I do think that for programs to drive long-term desired engagement and buy-in, you need a good representation of the organization that that you're servicing or that you're a part of, and their input can be really valuable, and generally by having a good cross-section of your organization represented, you get ideas that you otherwise wouldn't get, and they suggest insightful possibilities about here's how we could improve this, and it just helps drive buy-in too, because if you can start with that small group that's focused on continuous improvement and they all buy into that vision and goal, they're all influencers, and now you have many more people building the types of relationships that you're seeking to drive the change or the improvement that you want.
And that's exactly why we've encouraged employers when they're starting to create a benchmark by surveying their employees to kind of find out where things are. But in that same survey, ask, who are the influencers? Who holds the trust capital within the organization? And that could be with a company of 5,000 employees in multiple sites. And you could find trust capital groups within each small group. Or it could be a smaller company. You find one group of 3 or 4 people that kind of hold the trust capital of the other employees. And those become incredibly important, especially in a rollout and especially in engaging upfront, letting them play a role in both discussing how the model is going to be rolled out, their input on how to tweak the model, and then their involvement in sharing the model with other employees, and then continuing to have them involved, like you mentioned, Corb, on an ongoing basis, because they are the influencers and they are the ones that can have sometimes the most impact. Anybody have any thoughts about that? I would say, Kevin, in your case, you've used incentives quite effectively in a lot of the design that you've done, and you've been able to get a number of people to take some steps in some cases. And now my thoughts would be to use those relationships that have already been built, and we partnering with you, and I'm thinking specifically of the coaches who have now built relationships with a number of your people, to encourage them to go meet with, let's say, a Blomquist health therapist, a counselor, to make sure that they're taking advantage of the nice healthcare services, and actually set up an initial meeting, have a wellness visit. Everybody have that initial wellness visit with your primary care doctor and get a relationship there. And continue to encourage more and more to have that initial conversation with a coach, but then leverage that coaching relationship to get those people to do those others. And then, like you said, I think both of you and Corb said, well, leadership is huge, and you're a great example, Kevin, of wanting that leadership to be engaged in helping to grow that engagement and getting people to be involved. I think that's critically important. And quite honestly, we see that whether it's a 10,000 employee group or it's a small group of 50 employees. Take a look at Disney and what they've accomplished at building a culture within a company that's got tens of thousands of employees. Culture is the top of mind for the CEO of Disney. It's one of the most important things they talk about. Other companies have done the same thing. The CEO plays an incredible role, and leadership plays an incredible role. In fact, Jim Purcell, a good friend of mine who's been involved in helping us put on these different conferences and so forth, as well as webinars, was the CEO of Blue Cross Blue Shield of Rhode Island and managed all the healthcare in Rhode Island. I mean, Blue Cross had a huge percentage of the market. And after leaving that role, kind of the top of the food chain of healthcare, started a company to really drive towards CEOs and board members how critically important it was for them to recognize well-being and culture within their companies. And that's his whole company. That's what he does. And he's done some amazing studies and some amazing surveys and partnered up with some amazing groups across the country. But Jim's one of those clarion calls to say to board members and CEOs, nothing is more important for you to keep top of mind on your agenda than the well-being and culture of your company. Loved what Jim's done. Maybe we'll have Jim participate in one of our meetings, talk a little bit about some of the things that he's done, because I think he could share some cool things.
That would be cool.
Any other thoughts? I know, Austin, you're probably not in a place where you can share, but if you do have any thoughts, feel free to chat those. It looks like Corb had to jump off. Tommy, any thoughts about this idea of engagement that you want to share? Or Jason?
Austin is asking a question right now in the chat. He said, are any of you currently using the NUCA system of care? And if so, how did you implement it?
So, Austin, that's a very good question. I'm going to answer that real quickly, but I'm going to let Kevin answer that as well. So the whole concept of this aspirationalhealthcare.com is to teach business leaders how to implement the principles proven by the NUCA system at implementing an entire health plan for your employees. Kevin's a great example of having just spent the last 5-6 months learning about the NUCA model, learning about the aspirational healthcare model, and working with his team to implement, in his words, a fantastic benefit at a significantly less cost than what he otherwise would have had to. Kevin, you want to answer his question?
Yeah, I wouldn't have known that we were implementing the NUCA system, but necessarily. But I mean, that was as I've learned more about it, that's our intent. Like we genuinely want every partner in the business to be well and to be the best version of themselves. And so if that's your true desire, then you want to put in place something that's actually useful, that's cost effective, that creates what we've been talking about, like that true dynamic of there being relationships and partners and communication, sharing and understanding of what is available for you to create total wellness, not just something that like if I'm sick, I go to a doctor. If I break something, I go get it fixed. But like the total wellness of each individual in the company. And yeah, I mean, we're just kicking it off. So I think we're like probably no different than when the NUCAs did it, that we're early in here. So we're getting started with it. It's been good so far. And we've got a ways to go to get a full embracement of that by all parties involved. But I feel good about what we've started with and where we're headed.
And Austin, let me add my thoughts. If what you do is take the existing broken system that's extremely expensive, and you say, oh, let's add more money and let's implement all these additional things, it's a hard sell for a company. But when you implement strategies that we've shared with Kevin and that core offers through some cash pay strategies, and you make significant savings on that catastrophic medical plan, part of your overall benefit structure, it frees up a tremendous amount of resources to really start then investing in this relationship-based healthcare. And in my opinion, both of those have to go together hand in hand. If all you do is say, oh, here's all these wonderful ideas of building relationships and building culture and building prevention and getting people to not fall off the cliff in the first place, and yet you're burdened with the expense of this broken system, it's a difficult investment. And so it's really twofold. It's about both helping companies save. We really try to help companies save half of what they're currently spending on healthcare. And then because of that savings, now they can invest in a more NUCA model, which is more aspirational in nature, which is about not just waiting till people fall off the cliff, but actually journeying with people on the road of life so that they can meet their aspirations and not fall off the cliff. Let us know if that makes any sense, or if you've got other questions, Austin.
Well, I would like to
Tommy?
also add,
Yeah, go ahead.
I would also like to add that, Daryl, you've done a really great job at constantly educating brokers and bringing them on board so that they can help with this system and innovating this system, so that an employer doesn't have to walk this road alone. They can walk it with aspirational healthcare, or they can walk it with one of your recommended brokers / advisors. But more importantly, as I talk to different people, especially coming out of COVID, more and more people want to know what are our options besides just the norm, besides what we're always used to, because it is clear to see that the system that we're always used to is not the best way to go. Definitely being preventative is the best way to go. And having a company who can support that, I think it really ties your employees to you. But more importantly, I was a small employer. Like, I didn't have very many employees. And for me, when everything hit with Obamacare and the Affordable Care Act, I just had to drop my benefits altogether. And so learning some of the techniques with you and aspirational healthcare, it just encourages me that I don't have to drop benefits altogether for my employees. I can actually implement something and have it be cost effective.
I appreciate that. And it reminds me of when I was in Washington, D.C. a few weeks ago and presenting to the National Alliance of Healthcare Purchasing Coalitions. And one of the big issues is, how do you implement this aspirational model, especially when we're talking about building relationships? This is not something that historically companies have invested in. They're doing well if they can just do an open enrollment meeting and get everybody to sign up for whatever they're supposed to sign up for. And to me, therein lies the greatest opportunity for retention. If we don't leverage relationships and benefits, and all we do is offer a transactional insurance plan, what in the world would keep an employee, when it comes to the benefits that are being offered, from leaving one company and going to the next? I can have the same Blue Cross insurance plan at company A and company B, and I'm not losing anything. Where if we build relationships through a very specific aspirational model that's offered by an employer, even though it may take a lot more resources and effort on the part of the employer at the beginning to implement it in such a way that those relationships are built, the investment is well worth it on the back end when you can lower turnover. And I'd love to hear, Kevin, your thoughts about how expensive and how burdensome is turnover for a company like yours. You've obviously spent a tremendous amount of time and resources building an employee-owned organization because you want that connection, that retention. How challenging is it for you to have to replace somebody?
At the most experienced level, it's devastation. You can't replace them because there's just not enough experienced people. At the entry level, not as scary, but even still in our in our industry. There's not as many people entering the workforce that want to be in the trades. So it's a big deal more and more all the time that when we get people in, we want them to be here and stay for the long haul. So
Was that an impetus for you in creating an employer-owned organization?
not necessarily, but it was more of that had more to do with if you have people that know that they'll receive the financial benefits of being part of what you build, and they're in a job they actually love, they'll provide the best customer service, and that's just a better model overall. And that was probably the biggest driver for why we did it, is to ensure that we're treating our customers right, and that people are in jobs they love, and that they have a voice in what's going on, and receive the rewards accordingly. So
It reminds me of the principle of the 4 S's. You know, if you really apply Edwards Deming's philosophies of continuous quality improvement, you have to seriously consider the very first step, which often people don't take enough time to think about. And the first step of the CQA process is to define who the customer is. And just like you just mentioned, Kevin, there's multiple customers. You're wanting very much that your customers that bring you their automobiles to fix and to work on are happy with your services. They like bringing their cars there. They want to bring them back, but that's not the only customer you have to be concerned about. You just mentioned how important your own employees were as a customer for you. And I think that's critical, that employees are just as important as a customer for any organization, or most, than the customer who's coming in to buy the service. And I think most organizations that are really effective have recognized that it's not just the buyer, and it's not even just the employee or the team members that provide the service. There's also those referral sources. You know, it's those organizations that send you business, and they're an incredibly important customer as well. And I've always believed that the balancing of those different customers is the effective way to run a business, and to recognize them as a customer, and to literally say, okay, there's my customer. What's going to delight my customer? That's going to be very different between the person bringing in their car and the employee working on the car. And so identifying what is my customer's needs and wants, and what's going to delight them, and then how do I measure that on an ongoing basis so that I can then identify variance and remove the variance. That's just another one of my soapboxes.
Well, I think that's a very good point. We've always looked at benefits as something that you set up and then you forget about. And once a year, you have to deal with what is the cost going to be. But for the most part, it's just set up and then forget about. I think that could also help with retention by treating it like any other portion of your business, whether it be operations, inventory, customer service. You have a way to at least put a pulse on it on a more regular basis. Then the conversations brought up. I can't tell you how many times I've sat in a boardroom and the once a year meeting on how much health benefits cost. And you go down all the benefits and people are like, wait, that what's included? Like, most of the time people don't even know what they have in the benefits that you're offering. So I would think that would create more engagement too, just by having more regular conversations.
Yeah, well, and as we mentioned at the beginning of this call, there's I would say over the years, there's nothing more at the top of benefit managers' list than the challenge of engagement. That is a challenge for every benefit manager, almost in every company. That's like the top of the list. How do I get engagement? Which is why we wanted to kind of spend some time today exploring, what are the ways to drive engagement, and how do we put more effort and resources into the upfront enrollment or engagement process so that people will use it. Does anybody have any more thoughts or comments or questions? Because we don't need to make this go all the way to a full hour. Austin, do you have any more questions that you want to chat or comments you want to make? Same thing with anybody else on the call. Not seeing any, I want to thank each of you for participating today. We will be sending out the recording of today's call to everybody on our list, and would encourage you to invite other employers to this group as we send out the invitations. We're trying to build this group into a group of employers that are both looking at driving a more customer-centric benefit to their employees, as well as those that have, and thanks, Kevin, for your participation, and other companies that are kind of in the middle of it. So that's the purpose of it. And oh, before we leave, let me mention that Tommy's done a great job of building a LinkedIn group just for this group. And we'll be sending out the link and the invitation to participate in that LinkedIn group when we send out the recording and our invitation to our next meeting. But I would encourage you to also participate in this employers group through the LinkedIn group that she's created. Tommy, do you want to say anything more about that?
Just that I'll be posting these live events in there. So if you happen to miss it through your email, if you happen to miss the invite through your email, then you'll definitely get it in the group. But more importantly, if you can't participate in the live discussion, then at least you guys can reach out to each other in between the live discussions and really just connect as employers and keep the conversation going, so that whether you're just introduced to it or whether you're have something completely implemented, we're learning the best ways to help and retain top talent.
Thank you. All right. Well, if nobody else has any more thoughts or comments, let's go ahead and sign off, and we'll send out an invitation probably again for the 1st of March. So we'll probably do these once a month, and encourage you to invite others that you know to participate as well. Even if they've never heard of this before, let them be a part to learn more. Have a great weekend, everybody.
Thanks, Daryl.
Thanks, Daryl.
Thank you.
Thanks, Daryl. Bye.